Hi. I decided I'm just gonna make a handful of videos, and that way they can be more bite-sized and to the point. Because if you start stacking a bunch of different concepts on top of each other, I find that I get overwhelmed personally. So let's go through things one at a time. So the first thing I did on that rig I sent you was I added something called space switching to the bow and to the arrows so that we can toggle on and off whether or not our character is holding her bow or holding her arrow, or holding her bow or holding her arrow in her hand. And we don't have to go and set up a custom solution every time we want to use our character in a scene, you know? Um, and the way space switching works, I'm going to do it in a demo scene first. The way space switching works is that we're going to have two locators located at different positions in the world. Usually, you're going to have one that you're going to put somewhere in your character's rig, around the hand where you would want the bow to be, and then another one just at 000 in the middle of the grid here, so that you can have just a very obvious 0 point for it. And when it's in the middle of the world, it will technically be following this locator, but we're never going to move that locator, so it doesn't really matter, right? Uh, so we've got these locators, and we'll call one of these hand, and we'll call one of these world. Usually, you'll call this locator something more descriptive like bow global LOC. Just makes it easier to know, like, what is this locator doing? So bow hand LOC. And next I'm going to make some geometry that is going to act as our bow for the demonstration. Oh, didn't want to make a square. And I'm going to make a NURB circle to be our controller. Going to set its radius to 2 just so we can see it. And then I'm going to call this bow control. It's very important to name things as you go with this because you're making so many different things at once when you're building one of these rigs that it's very easy to lose track of what goes where. So we just want to build in a certain level of idiot proofness, I guess. So I've made my bow control, which is just this NURB circle. And then I put it under two groups by hitting Control G on it twice. And I'm going to name the second group, the one it's immediately under, Bow Control Offset GRP. And the one on top of that group is going to be Bow Control Group. And that means that we can set a parent constraint on this bow control, but we'll still be able to like fine tune the placement of our bow when it's snapped to follow the hand or whatever. It just gives us more flexibility in terms of how we set up our rig and how our animators can use the rig after we've made it. So we've got our groups made. I'm just going to put P cube underneath the bow control just to keep things simple for the purposes of this. So now, for our constraint to make this all work, we're going to select the hand, the global, and then the bow control offset group. The way selecting for parent constraints works is that you're always going to select the driver, the thing that's going to be in control, and then the driven, the thing that we want to control with the other object. So we want to control the position of the bow with the positions of our locators. So we can select multiple parents, and then they will be in charge of the last thing that we select. So we can select mom, and then dad, and then we can select the child, and hit parent. I'm going to have maintain offset off for this, otherwise it doesn't really snap the way we like. It behaves a little unpredictably if you have maintain offset on for this one. So I'm going to hit apply, and we saw when we hit apply that our bow control actually moved. And we'll also see here that we now have a bunch of connections in our translate and rotates. And if we try and translate the offset group, I have everything selected, the offset group, and then try and move one of these, it snaps back. So if we had parented directly to the bow control, we would have lost the ability to move around our thing. But now I can move my bow around and then move my locators around, and it works fine. Let me just set everything back to where it was. So now we have a bow control that is 50-50 between the hand and the world origin, right? If we're going with the idea that this is our Sparrow character. So now we have to go and open our node editor to make a switch for this. I'm going to go ahead on the bow control first, and I'm going to add an attribute by going up into the channel box, hitting edit, add attribute, should open this window, and we're just going to call this bow, hold bow, like we did on the other rig. We'll hit 0 and 1, so we'll just have like off and on. There we go. Now we see that we have a toggle between holding and not holding the bow. Now that we have that toggle, we can have the bow controller selected as well as the parent constraint we made. And we can go to Windows, Node Editor, and that'll open a new window for us with just our bow control and our bow control parent constraint. We will also get the shape node, but we don't actually really ever want to see shape nodes in the node editor. It's useful for some things, but for most rigging stuff, we don't need it. It's just an opportunity to accidentally mess up our scene. If you delete the shape node of an object, whether it's polygons or a NURB circle, you'll actually delete the geometry of it, but you'll still have the translate node. The way Maya works behind the scenes is it's all kind of these Russian nesting dolls of different groups. So here on our bow control, we have our translates, our rotates, and our scales. And we've got these little spaghetti strings that we can pull off of them and hook into different things on other nodes. And that way we can build relationships in our rig that, you know, they just work the way we intend. So I'm gonna hit tab to bring up the search box, but I believe you can also... Oh, you cannot right click. Yeah, I don't know. There is another way to make nodes, but so tab will bring up the search bar, and we're going to bring up a reverse node. And the reason we're going to use a reverse node is that when hold bow is 1, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So right now, if I select our parent constraint group, we see we have the name of each of our locators here, the hand and global. And they're each set to 1, which means they're both on and they are sharing the same amount of responsibility for the bow's current position. We only want one of those to be on at the same time. So when our hold bow condition is set to 1, we want the to say that it's held, it's in her hand. We want this bow global location to be set to 0, but this set to 1, and then vice versa. So we can just expand this out. We're going to name this bow space switch. Take the input X and connect it to our hold bow switch, the output of our hold bow switch. The left side is always the input, the right side is always the output. We'll take output X and we will put it into our global because we want it to be parented to the global. We want global to say 1 when hand says 0. And we hook our hand directly up to the hold bow. The order doesn't really matter. If you want 0 to mean it is on, then you can do that. If you want 1 to mean that it's on, like we just did, you can do that too. So long as the rig is behaving in the way that you expect, it's working. So that's all there is to setting up a space switcher. There are increasingly complicated ways to do, like, sometimes I want the bow on her hand, other times I want the bow on her back. It gets a little complicated, but you could do that too. So I'm going to go ahead and, I'll even title this tab. This will be our bow space switch tab, and we'll make a new one so that when we go back, we're testing the rig out, we can go back to this and it won't have a bunch of random garbage in it as we've been building our rig with other tech. So now we can see that we close all that out, that our bow is swapping between these the two nodes perfectly, and we can even shift that around, and that offset we made with the bow control is still there when our character is no longer holding the bow. So the only thing you have to remember with that is to, after you set your key, just zero it out on the next one after you're transitioning it to the other position. Nothing crazy there. So I think that is enough for lesson 1.